Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. Okay, so today we're going to talk about contingent sales. And I don't think I've had a class on contingent sales for a while. I think it was like towards the end of last year that we did it. And I know that, especially in this market, the contingent sales are, challenging to say the least. So I wanted to just go through it because I still see it from a ton of agents when we're looking at these files that things are being left out. They're not using the correct forms. They're not filling out the forms correctly. And so I wanted to spend some time with it because it's such a huge part of our market right now that our deals are contingent, that I wanted to make sure that you guys had some clarity on it and an opportunity to ask questions, that maybe you have with deals that you're working on or things that have happened in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and you guys should be looking at contingency for sale of buyer's property. That should be what you're seeing. So if you're not seeing that, let me know. Otherwise, if you have a question, you can unmute yourself. I'd rather you raise your hand or put it in the chat. That would be great, but you can unmute yourself if you want to ask something. All right. So contingency for sale of buyer's property, or the abbreviation for that is COP, is the form that you're going to use when your seller is going to be a buyer. We're going to start here with the buyer side of it. We're going to move on to the seller side of it, because in the seller side of it, there's two forms that we need to talk about. So from the buyer side of things, right, when I have a seller that's become a buyer, I have to incorporate this form with every offer I write. Now, going back to the procedures of a contingent sale, you should not be showing properties or writing offers until you have your seller's property in escrow, until you've accepted an offer. And you've accepted that offer subject to the seller finding the replacement property, right? And we'll get into that process in the next half, right? So the contingent sale, now that I've got the seller's property in escrow, I'm going to start showing them property, find property, write offers. I'm going to include this into all of my offers. So by default, it says this is an addendum to the purchase agreement. That's the default. That should be the only thing that it's ever attached to if you're generating it as the buyer's agent. Okay. The agreement, the purchase agreement, this is the date of the purchase agreement, right? So if I wrote my purchase agreement yesterday on 5/4, then that would be the date that goes here. Okay. On the property known as, this is just left over from where we're writing the offer. So that's the seller's property, right? That's the property that we're writing the offer on. This is your buyer's names. This is the seller's names if you have them. And then here is the buyer's property, the property that they've sold, their down leg. So just so you guys know, moving forward, we're going to refer to the seller's sale of their property as the down leg, the buyer's purchase of the replacement property as the up leg. Okay, so down leg, up leg, just so it makes it a little bit easier. So this is the down leg address, the buyer's property. Buyer's property contingent. This agreement is contingent upon buyer entering into a contract for sale of and closing escrow on buyer's property, paragraphs 2 and 4. Okay, or I can check this box that says only entering into a contract for sale of buyer's property. That's not a good contingency. But if I've already sold it, right, that's like, let's just say that I'm not worried about selling it. I just need to get it into escrow when I'm purchasing. Maybe the buyer has money to purchase their up leg, right? So they're not necessarily dependent on it, but they would still like to get the property sold. So maybe you're only contingent on finding the buyer for the property, so that process is started. In most cases, in 99.9% of the cases, that's not going to be the issue, right? You're not going to be doing that. You're going to need both, right? Because those buyers that are also sellers, they're selling their house because they need the money. They need the money to buy the next house, right? So we're not going to probably ever use this first one. But if, let's say that I did follow the correct procedure and say, I've sold that house already. I've already put it into escrow, their down leg. then all I need to do is check off this box here in 1C that says it's only contingent on the close of the buyer's property, right? Because I've already sold it. So I'm not searching for buyers any longer. I've already found that buyer on the down leg. The buyer is in escrow. And now we're just dependent on the sell closing, right? The down leg closing, because we've already put it into escrow. So we don't have to have those two parts to this contingency. What we're going to do is we're going to put the buyer's property is already in escrow with. That's the name of the escrow company where it is. This is the escrow number. A copy of the contract for sale of buyer's property and the contact information and escrow number for that sale, collectively escrow evidence, is attached to the COP form or will be delivered to sellers 2 days after acceptance. Now, I would incorporate it. If I already have it, I'm not going to wait 2 days to send it to them. I'm going to send it with this COP with my offer. Okay, so you're going to send copy of the purchase contract and all the escrow information to the seller with your offer, right? To the listing agent with your offer. This section 2 right here, buyer entering into contract for sale of buyer property, is only for 1A, the default, which is both selling it and closing it, or if I've checked off B here. So 2 only applies if it's 1A or 1B. Okay, is that clear? So if I've only checked off 1C, if I've only checked off here 1C that it's only subject to them closing their down leg, then it's going to skip down here to paragraph 3, which is the listing and MLS status of buyer's property. So see here, it says if 1A or 1B applies. Oh no, sorry, we're going to skip. Sorry. That's also paragraph 3 is also only for these first two, 1A and 1B. If I don't have that, which is just the close escrow, we go down to paragraph 4. Close of escrow buyer's property. If 1A or 1C applies, buyer has until the following time to close escrow on the sale of buyer's property. The scheduled close date of the escrow or no later than 5 days prior to the scheduled close of the escrow of seller's property. Okay. So it's confusing. So here's the thing. So let's say I write my offer today. I put my down leg property into escrow 3 weeks ago. Okay. I put it into escrow 3 weeks ago and I just got my offer accepted today on my up leg. So what's going to happen is my close of escrow, let's say, is 10 days from now. So 10 days from now is my close of escrow on the down leg. So 10 days from now will be May 15th. If I just got my offer accepted today, I'm probably looking at a 30-day escrow, right? So my close of escrow date from today wouldn't be until June, right? Probably June 6th or 5th or, whatever. So I have until June. My contingency period is either going to be when the escrow closes, I have to remove the contingency, or no later than 5 days prior to our scheduled close on the up leg. But to do that, you have to check that box. Okay. So you have to make a choice. The default is my contingency removal date is only good until that escrow closes. So technically, the seller can't ask me to remove my contingency any earlier than the scheduled close of my down leg, right? So if we need extensions and things like that, it could affect us because the scheduled close, the original close from the stuff that I provided to them is the 15th. But if it's going to go to the 20th, I may have to remove my contingent on the 15th, even if the escrow hasn't closed on the 15th. If I write this COP and add it to my offer and check this box that says no later than 5 days prior to the close of the up leg property, then I would have until, if our scheduled close date was June 5th, I would have until, June 1st, May 30th. Does that make sense? I feel like I got confused. So you guys tell me if you have questions.
Confused.
Okay. So what's your question? Can't just say you're confused. What's your question?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Joseph.
So basically, if you don't check that box, which I don't know if I'm right, or if you don't check that box, it's just contingent until you sell your property.
Yes. Your contingency period should end when you close escrow.
If you
That's
don't
the
check that.
default if you don't check the box. So the default is I have my down leg in escrow. I write an offer on the up leg. My contingency period for the sale of my down leg property is up when my close of escrow comes.
Perfect.
Right? When that close of escrow date shows up.
On the new property, correct?
And on the old property. My contingency to purchase, right? The contingency of the sale of my down leg, that's on the purchase of my up leg, has to be removed when my down leg close of escrow date arrives. Okay, that's your contingency period. So it's not written in stone. Like there isn't like it's 17 days, it's 21 days, it's 15 days. It's not like that. It's either the close date of the down leg property or 5 days prior to the close, the scheduled close of the up leg property.
Okay, so that's basically like this is for the buyer side of a contingency because there's a seller's contingent and buyer contingent, right?
Yes, this is a buyer side. That's what we said at the very beginning of the class.
Okay, perfect. I'm on the same page.
It's a buyer side. Okay, thank you, Joseph. Patricia, go ahead.
So just to restate, the default is that I'm not going to close on escrow in my new property until my old property isn't going to close until I'm closed in escrow with my new property. That's the default.
No. The default time period for the contingency of purchase, right? Or contingency of sale, let's call it. It's a contingency of sale, right? I have a contingency to sell my down leg, my property, the property I already own. If I write an offer that is contingent on that property selling, my contingency period for that is the scheduled close date of that property, the down leg property, the property I already own. Or if I check the box in paragraph 4, it would be 5 days prior to the close of the up leg property, the scheduled close of the up leg property. So it's going to be one or the other. It's either 5 days before I'm supposed to close on the property I'm buying, or my contingency is up the close date of the property I sold. Okay, go ahead, Jesus.
Therefore, according to what I'm hearing, it's best not to check it, correct?
But it's up to you. It doesn't, I mean, look, here's the thing. If I'm already in escrow for 3 weeks and I had a 30-day escrow, I've got another week to go before my escrow on my down leg is supposed to close. Right? That's it. I'm supposed to close. Even if I still, let's just say that I'm going to close tomorrow. The buyers have already removed all their contingencies. They're getting ready to order loan docs, whatever. They're like, we're at the finish line on the down leg, and I finally find my replacement property. I mean, that's not going to happen, but let's just say it's that far. Then my contingency period, if I write an offer and get it accepted, is the close date, which would be whatever that is, tomorrow, Monday, right, Tuesday. That would be the default contingency removal date. But if I didn't want to do that because, maybe we need extensions or whatever the case is, I could ask for it to be 5 days prior to this new escrow closing, my up leg that I'm purchasing. It's all up to you. It's preference. You could even say, listen, okay, I just barely got into escrow today, and luckily I was able to write an offer the same day and get it accepted. So now they're running at the same time. Maybe then I want to make sure I buy myself some time. So I make it 5 days prior to that close of the up leg escrow, right? It's all just, it's going to depend on the situation for each one. But the default is pretty good. I mean, the default is fine. You're going to be protected with the default because the default is your close date. And so if the close date gets extended, if there's some other, it's the close date is probably the safest bet for all of you guys. But you could make the choice to do 5 days prior. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's the contingency period for selling and being able to purchase. The status, paragraph 5. this applies to everybody, right? Buyer agrees to keep seller informed about the status of the transaction for the sale of buyer's property, including any changes, modifications, addenda, or amendments to the terms of the accepted offer, or delays to or removals of contingencies, updates. And you have to do that within 2 days after the seller's request, but no earlier than the applicable time to remove contingencies in the contract for sale of buyer's property. Buyer shall deliver to seller evidence of the removal of those identified contingencies. So I've given the seller on the property I'm purchasing, I've given them a copy of my contract. So the seller on the property I'm purchasing knows all my time periods, right? The listing agent knows what my time periods are. They know when contingencies are supposed to be removed. They know all of that stuff. So there's two things. When there's a change to the contract in any way, if we negotiate the price, like we renegotiate the price based on an appraisal, maybe, if the buyer asks for an extension of time on any of the contingencies or on the escrow, any changes at all to that down leg sale, the sale where I as buyer am selling my home, I have to notify the listing agent on the property I'm purchasing on the up leg. I have to give them a copy of everything. I have to give it to them. Now, with this part B of paragraph 5, within 2 days after seller's written request, the seller can send me a notice to perform to provide all that stuff if I don't do it. Right? So if, let's say that tomorrow is the inspection contingency removal for the buyer on the sale of my property. If I don't give it to them, give them a copy of the contingency removal, the seller can send me a notice to perform to get the contingency removal from the buyer. And if I don't do it in those 2 days, the seller on my up leg can cancel. Okay. You guys clear on that? Which means if I get a notice to perform today and I haven't sent a notice to perform to my buyer because they haven't removed the contingency, I could be a day behind the seller, and the seller could have the right to cancel on me before I could take action on my down leg sale. Is that clear?
Yep.
Okay. You guys, at any time, just jump in and tell me, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, or put a note in the chat, and I promise you I will try to clarify it as much as I can. So here's the thing. If I'm contingent, if my purchase on my up leg is contingent on me selling my home, I have to be on that buyer. Like, they have to perform, and I have to have the paperwork, and anything that we negotiate and do has to immediately be sent to the listing agent. Because if I don't, I'm now giving them an opportunity to cancel, right? I'm giving them an opportunity to cancel on me because I'm not performing. It says I have to give them that stuff. So as the minute I get it, I send it to the listing agent so they have it. Okay. Cancellation of buyer's property. Now, this is the one where I think most of the buyers who are sellers, right? They're buying their up leg property. This is the one where you guys kind of evade the listing agent. If the buyer's property is in or enters escrow and either party to that escrow gives the other a notice of cancellation of contract, buyer within 2 days thereafter shall deliver to seller written notice of that cancellation. So if I'm the seller on my down leg and the buyer says to me, we're canceling, they send a cancellation instruction over, I have to send that cancellation instruction to the listing agent on my up leg within 2 days. Okay. I have to give it to them. Now, if that escrow on my down leg cancels the one that this contingency is on, the seller does not have to wait for me to get another escrow. The seller could cancel on me immediately on my up leg. Okay. So you got to keep that in mind. Backup offers and seller's right to require to remove contingencies or cancel. So here's, yes, Jesus, go ahead.
So I'm the listing agent, and the buyer cancels on me, or gets the cancellation and their down leg, so I can cancel them without notice to buyer to perform anything, just cancel Don't need to wait.
No, I'm gonna show you right now how the cancellation works.
Thank you.
Okay. So backup offers. So, yeah, just bear with me for a second. We're going to get to how this form uses for the cancellation. So backup offers. The seller has the right to offer the property for sale for backup offers. The parties acknowledge that brokers shall not violate MLS rules requiring accurate property status reporting. So what they're saying is, just because I have a contingent offer and I can get backup offers, it doesn't mean that I get to put it as active or leave it as active in the MLS, because the rules are, if I have any contract, I have to have it active under contract, right? So if I'm going to accept as listing agent a contingent offer, then I have to put the property in the MLS as active under contract to get the backup offers. Okay. So the seller keep marketing it. They can keep doing whatever they want because this is contingent, right? Because there's that extra step to get it purchased, to close the purchase. So removal of buyer's contingencies, unless 7C3 is selected, and we'll get to that in a minute. If seller accepts a written backup offer and provides buyer a copy of the signed accepted backup offer within the time specified in 7C1 or 2, and we're about to get there, seller shall have the right to give written notice to buyer to, in writing, remove this contingency, remove the loan contingency, if any, and provide verification of sufficient funds to close escrow without the sale of buyer's property. If buyer fails to complete these actions within 2 days, or, right, you can put another number, after delivery of such notice, seller may then immediately cancel the agreement in writing. So let's look at what those time periods are. The default, paragraph 7C, number 1, immediate right to notify buyer anytime after acceptance. So the default is this. I am the listing agent on your up leg. Okay. We'll use Jesus for an example. Jesus is the buyer's agent on the down leg. I accept his offer. I put my offer, leave my offer up on the MLS as subject, as active under contract. And then I get an offer from Jasmine that I like better. Jesus's offer, he had left this as the default. He didn't check this box right here. He left it as the default. And I accepted his offer yesterday. And today I get an offer from Jasmine that I like better. And I send Jesus a proof of the offer, right? Here's the offer that we're going to accept. And I'm going to send him a notice to remove the contingency of sale and his loan contingency and show me proof of funds to complete the sale. And if he can't do that, I can cancel. And that's it. So then what we need to do is, to protect ourselves as the buyer's agent, is we check off this box that says delayed right to notify. So no earlier than 17 days after acceptance. So now in the same scenario, Jesus has written an offer. I've accepted it. He's checked that box for delayed right to notify buyer. He has 17 days before I can ask him to remove his contingency. So day 2, 3, 4, whatever, we're in escrow, I get that same offer from Jasmine. I have to wait until day 17. Day 17 comes and I send a notice to Jesus that says, hey, I have this backup offer. Here it is. I need you to remove all these contingencies. If you don't remove these contingencies, I'm going to cancel. If he can't do it, I cancel and I can move on with the other offer. Okay. And then the third choice is no right to notify buyer. Now, you're already kind of behind the 8 ball with this offer because it's contingent, especially in the market we're living in now. There is no chance that a seller is going to accept your offer where it says no right to notify, which means that they're stuck with you until you remove that contingency. Nobody's going to do that. So to protect yourself as best you can, you're going to do delayed right to notify. And it's like here, it says no earlier than 17 days. Have it match whatever your longest contingency is that's in the offer. Okay. So when you wrote the offer, if your loan contingency is 17 days, make it 17 days. If your loan contingency is 14 days, make this 14 days. Okay. Have it match the rest of your contingencies because they're going to have to be removed anyway in order for you to move forward if they get a backup offer. Okay. Questions about the right to notify?
So basically, if the if you check the box off, then I mean basically they have the right. If you don't check that box, then they have any time period to if they get a better offer, they have any time period to cancel. If you don't remove those contingencies,
Yes.
if you don't check that box, it could be like the next day.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
All right. Any other questions? No? Okay. Removal of contingencies. This contingency can only be removed in writing, even if buyer removes this contingency, unless buyer also performs all the actions pursuant to paragraph 7B. That's everything. Seller retains the right to cancel under paragraph 9. So let's just say that you have this delayed right to notify, right? And it says right here for removal of contingencies, you have to remove the buyer's contingency of sale plus your loan contingency and show them proof of funds to close when they send you that. If you only remove the contingency of sale, but don't remove the other ones, the seller still has the right to cancel on you. So keep that in mind. Okay. And that's why I always say to you guys, you shouldn't be writing offers on an up leg until you're in escrow on your down leg, so that when these time periods show up, like the 17 days, you're probably already towards the end of your escrow. Buyers removed contingencies, the whole thing. You can show that you're about to close. So if it's time to remove the contingencies, you have some proof of some stuff. Okay, just keep that in mind. Seller's right to cancel. Seller may cancel the agreement in writing as follows: after first giving buyer a written notice to remove buyer contingencies and proof of funds, provide proof of funds below. It's part of this actual form. If buyer fails to take all actions and specified in actions specified in 7B, that's the first way. B, after first giving buyer a notice to buyer to perform, if buyer fails to enter into contract for the sale of buyer's property within the time specified in 2A, that's for if you need to sell it. After first giving buyer notice to buyer to perform, if buyer fails to close escrow for the sale of buyer's property within the time specified in paragraph 4, we talked about that earlier, right? If your close date is May 15th and you don't close on May 15th, the seller can send you a notice to perform. And if you don't close in those 2 days, they can cancel on you. After first giving buyer a notice to buyer to perform, if buyer fails to deliver escrow evidence within the time specified in paragraph 1C or 2B. After first giving buyer a notice to buyer to perform, if buyer fails to deliver evidence of the listing of buyer's property, or is applicable, the submission of buyer's property listing to the MLS within the time specified in 3C. If buyer fails to deliver evidence of a removal of contingencies in the sale of buyer's property and as specified in paragraph 5B, right? So if the contingencies got removed on my down leg, I have to give it to the seller. If I don't give it to the seller, the listing agent, and they send me a notice to perform and I still don't do it, they can cancel on me. If buyer gives notice to seller of either party cancellation of the contract for buyer's property. So remember we talked about, if I notify the listing agent that my buyer has canceled on me or has sent cancellation instructions, they don't have to do anything else. They can immediately cancel our transaction. Immediately. So if I tell them, hey, listen, my buyer canceled, right? Here's the copy of the cancellation. But I would hope that we can negotiate because I have a backup. Like if you have backup offers, then you tell them the truth. Hey, look, I have a backup offer. I'm going to jump in escrow right now. The buyer's already removed some contingencies, whatever. And if you can get them to keep the escrow open, then great. You're going to have to you're going to do amendment of existing agreement terms with the new terms and the period of time that they're going to give you for things. If the seller doesn't want to, they can send cancellation instructions immediately and you have no argument. Okay, so keep that in mind. Yes, Oscar.
Kyle, good morning. I have a question. So if you have your property is already in escrow, the down lake property, and you already accepted an offer your offer was accepted for the up lake property.
Mm-hmm.
But if the people selling the property on the up lake have the same situation you do?
That they're contingent?
Yes.
What do you mean, what if they do?
What if they're waiting they haven't found the property? You already accepted their offer, but they haven't found
Yeah, well, yet. It's the same thing. You're just going to have to wait for their contingency periods, which means you're going to have to do extensions on your down leg. You're going to have to adjust your time periods, all that stuff. It's going to happen. Now, we're going to talk about when you're a seller that's contingent. That's what we're going to talk about next, because there may be times where, because there's an up leg and you need to close escrow, you might have to close and rent back, right? While you're waiting for them to close on their up leg. So it's just a matter of managing time periods. But you're going to find that a lot, Oscar. That's the point of why we're going through this, is that, yeah, sellers are going to have contingencies also, even though you're going to have contingency upon contingency upon contingency a lot of times.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Jasmine, you had a question?
No, I think I'm.
Oh, I just saw you were unmuted. That's why.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right.
That last question was a good one, I think.
Thank you, Joseph. All right. All right, here we go. Buyer's right to cancel. Buyer may cancel this agreement in writing if prior to buyer's removal of the buyer's property contingency specified in 1A, B, or C is applicable. If 1A or 1B applies, buyer is unable to enter into a contract to sell it, right? That's what we talked about, was I have to sell it. So if the 1A and 1B is there, where first contingency is I need to sell the property, then they can cancel in the time specified there, how much time they have to put into escrow. If they can't, then they cancel. If 1A or 1C applies, either party or for buyer's property gives notice that they cancel the contract for purchase of buyer's property. So reverse it. I said, if the buyer sends cancellation on my down leg and I send it to the seller has the right to cancel. If I get the cancellation on my down leg, I immediately also have the right to cancel my up leg, as long as this contingency is still in place. So I could send the cancellation instruction from my down leg along with cancellation instructions for my up leg, so that I can get out of that escrow because that one canceled. So it goes both ways. Buyer has the right to cancel. Seller has the right to cancel. You could do it if you wanted to. Or in 1A and 1C applies if buyer is unable to close escrow on buyer's property within the time specified. So let's say, again, May 15th is coming. There's buyers can't close on May 15th. I can send cancellation instructions to my up leg. Hey, we can't close on the 15th, so here's my cancellation. I'm out. Okay, that's the buyer's rights. 11. This is how it affects the time periods for everything. So if we look at this, right, it says contract obligations other than deposit, right? So that's your contingency periods and all that stuff. Time periods in the agreement for inspections, contingencies, covenants, close of escrow, and other obligations, excluding those in this addendum, shall begin as specified in the agreement. So the default is whatever the time periods are in the purchase agreement that we wrote, the time periods will start as we agreed upon, which is from acceptance, right? If I check this box, it says on the day after buyer delivers the seller any of the following: escrow evidence for buyer's property, or buyer's election in writing signed by buyer to begin time periods, or buyer's removal of this contingency for sale of buyer's property. Any three of those things will start the time periods clicking, right? Or the clock ticking. So if you check this box to delay your time periods a little bit, the first thing to trigger them is the escrow evidence for buyer's property. And what that means is that's if the sale is contingent on me actually entering into the sale. I'm not already in escrow on my down leg. But if I'm already in escrow on my down leg, then the next thing is either I, in writing, say, hey, I'm not removing my contingency, but I want the time periods to start. That's number one. If I don't do that, then it starts when I remove my contingency for selling my down leg. Okay, so that's the time periods. I would suggest for strength of offer, you don't check that box. You let the time period start with the acceptance of the offer like normal. Okay, same thing here with the deposit. It's the same thing with the deposit. If the default is it starts like normal, which means I'm putting my deposit in 3 days after, it's 3 business days after acceptance. If I check this box, it says doing 3 business days after I either deliver the escrow evidence, the election in writing saying, hey, here in writing, I'm telling you I'm putting my deposit in, or I remove the contingency. Okay. So then I have my buyer sign this and I send it to the seller along with my offer. Here is the notice to remove buyer contingencies and provide proof of funds. Here's the notice to perform built into this. So let's say, for example, I've submitted this COP with my offer. The seller has accepted it. When it's time for the seller to now ask me to remove that, right? Going back to paragraph 7, appear, right, where I have the seller's request to remove, I use this form. I just have the seller send this, and that's it. That receiving this back again with this signed by the seller, dated, is a notice to perform for the buyer. Okay. So questions about the buyer's contingency? Any questions? Because I'm going to move on now to the seller's purchase of replacement property, the contingent seller. Okay. All right. So let's look at a contingent seller. So if I have a seller, what's going on here? Yeah, somebody unmuted.
Quick question. So that's an extra form you would have to add on, correct? To your like offer? Like
yes.
that.
The last one we were talking about. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Here we go. Seller's purchase of replacement property. This needs to be incorporated whenever your seller is selling a property and it's contingent on them finding a replacement property. This has to be included. It is not sufficient to just write in a counteroffer, this sale is contingent on seller finding a replacement property and closing concurrently. That is not sufficient. You must include this form. So in your counters, it can say that this sale is contingent on the seller finding a replacement property and closing concurrently, but it also needs to include the following portion of that sentence, which is CAR form SPRP to be incorporated in this agreement, form provided to be signed and returned with this counteroffer, right? I have to have this form incorporated. So if it's part of the counteroffer, right, because I'm countering to include it because the buyer didn't, then I'm going to check off this box. Okay. If for some reason, maybe I happen to be double ending the deal, I could just make it part of the purchase agreement. Okay. So again, the property, the seller's names, the buyer's names, the seller's names are going to go in there. So here's the first contingency. There's two parts to this. Finding a replacement property. Okay. This agreement is contingent on the seller entering into a contract to acquire a replacement property or identifying a suitable property to move to. Finding a replacement property contingency. So guess what? Finding a replacement contingency doesn't have to be purchasing. Could be a rental. Right? It says a suitable property to move to. It doesn't say to purchase. So this contingency is either I'm buying or I'm going to rent, but I still got to find a place to rent. So this contingency can work for both of those. Okay. The default is 17 days. Now, how many of you are confident that you can get somebody in escrow in 17 days? You need to make some adjustments to the time periods. Now, the first question is when we do this is everybody always says, well, it's a contingent sale. We can't have a 30-day escrow. Yes, I understand that, but there's no need to start changing escrow periods and doing things because the escrow period is going to have to be flexible anyway, because we don't know when we're going to be able to find that replacement property. So as we get farther down in this form specific, there is a place for an automatic extension that the buyer has no right to refuse. Okay, so we're going to go through that in a moment. So 17 days, probably not enough. I would suggest maybe a 30-day contingency on them finding a replacement property, right? Just to give yourself ample time to try to find something to get them into. Remember, this contingency, just like any other, can be negotiated to be extended. So if we don't find something and let's say we change it from 70 to 21 or we leave it at 17, and if 17 days in we don't find something, we can send an extension of time request for that contingency. And if the buyer accepts it, great, we keep moving on. If they don't, then they can cancel, we can cancel, and we can either move on with a different buyer that will accept those terms or, or not, or, sometimes those sellers choose not to sell, but let's hope that's not the case. So let's just say we're going to change that from 17 days to 30 days. Okay. So seller shall within 30 days after acceptance remove the finding replacement property contingency or cancel the agreement. If seller does not remove the finding replacement property contingency in writing within that time, buyer, after first giving a notice to seller to perform, may cancel the agreement. Okay. So I have to find something, right? That's the norm. Is I'm selling you my house, but I got to go find something. So 1A, the default is going to be what you're going to use the majority of the time. Now, if for some reason you were able to get an offer accepted prior to selling it, then you would check off B. Seller has already entered into a contract to acquire replacement property. Here's the escrow holder. Here's the escrow number, right? So now it's not contingent on me finding a place. I've already found that. So then the only contingency is going to be 1C, which is close of replacement property. This agreement is contingent on seller's ability to close on escrow replacement property according to the contract. You have to check the box. It is not immediately incorporated in here, that close part. You have to check it off. You have to be active to make it part of the contingency. So you could have both, right? You have 1A and then you have 1C with that box checked, which means, hey, I got first the contingencies. I have this many days, 17, 21, 30, whatever it is, to find a new home, whether that's a purchase or it's a rental. If it's a rental, then you don't have to worry about this close because there is no closing of escrow. It's just I found a rental, I got the rental. But if it's a sale, right, and you're purchasing something, then you want to put this close of replacement property. When it says the agreement is contingent on seller's ability to close escrow on the replacement property, what that means is not actually closing because you can't close until you close this one. You need the money. So what that means by ability to close is I've removed my contingencies. I've gotten loan docs, right? That's an ability. If I'm that far, I have the ability to close. That's probably going to be the time you're going to have to remove that close of replacement property contingency. Okay. Now, time periods. Okay. Well, first on these contingencies, questions on 1A and C. Any questions? Okay, good. Time periods. The time periods in this form are the opposite of the time periods in the COP. In this one, the default is that the time periods for the agreement, the contingencies, the inspections, all that stuff won't start until the day after the seller removes the contingency of finding a replacement property in 1A. So here's the problem with that. We can't have the default work that way because if we have the default work that way, that means that the time periods for the buyer to do their inspection, the buyer to do their appraisal, the loan contingency, all that stuff doesn't start until I remove my contingency, which means their contingencies are probably going to match mine, their contingency periods on my uplay. I want this buyer to already be locked in, ready to go so that I have time to maneuver on my purchase. So what we have to do on the SPRP is check the box that they're going to remain as specified in the agreement. And the same thing with the buyer's deposit. We're going to check the box because the default is that deposit doesn't go in until after I remove my contingency of finding a replacement property. We don't want that. We want them to be doing their stuff, their inspections, their appraisals, get their loan ready, all of that stuff while I'm working on my uplay. Okay. Questions about the time periods and the buyer's deposit? Okay, good. Just remember, you always on 2A and B, always check the box inside the paragraph that says as specified in the agreement. Close of escrow. So remember earlier I said there's a built-in extension already here. Parties agree that the seller may extend the close of escrow date for the sale of seller's property for a maximum of 30 days, 45 days, whatever you think you need. Now, I would suggest that if you have a 30-day escrow and you have a 30-day contingency period for finding a replacement property, right, your automatic extension should probably be 45 days, just in case, right? Because you're not going to probably close both things in another 30 after that. It's up to you. It depends on how your acceptance works. But what happens is this extension has to be sent, an actual extension of time addendum. It's not just here because it's in this form. You have to send an extension of time addendum when I remove the contingency for finding a replacement property. If I do those two things, right? So let's just say that I had a 30-day contingency of finding a replacement property. Okay, I accept your offer today. We all sign off on everything. And I get lucky. And 10 days from now, I find the property that I want, right? And I had built in here a 30-day extension, right? So we've already been in escrow for 10 days. I have a 30-day extension on there, and we had a 30-day escrow. So 20 days, we're probably not going to close in those 20 days because I have to do my stuff. You have to do yours. So I send to you, the buyer, a contingency removal for finding a replacement property and an extension of time together. And if I do that, the buyer can't say, well, no, I'm not going to give you the extension because they've already agreed to the extension here. Okay. If I don't put it here, for example, if I do this and then I remove my contingency and send them an extension of time request for the escrow, the buyer does not have to give me the extension. Okay. So you got to put it in this paragraph in 2C. Okay. Just like any other contingency, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just like any contingency, if the contingency is not removed in writing, it still exists. It doesn't matter how many days past I've gone. So just like your inspection contingency, if your inspection contingency is 10 days and we're on day 14 and you haven't removed it on a contingency removal in writing, it's still in place. Same thing for this. If I have a 30-day contingency for finding a replacement property, and I go to day 40 and I haven't removed the contingency, that contingency still exists, even though I'm 10 days past the date we agreed upon, which means as seller, I could still cancel on you. Okay. So keep in mind, that's how it works. So you guys got to stay on top of it from both sides. Notices to perform when the time periods are up. You don't want things just floating around because you're still giving them an opportunity. Okay. Buyer signs, seller signs, right? Seller signs, buyer signs if they accept it. Okay, questions about the SPRP? Because before we go, I want to quickly go over the SIP because it's going to be important too for the purchase. Yes, Jasmine, go ahead.
So both this seller purchase replacement property has to be included with the previous form you just showed us to the contingency for sale buyer's property. Both of these have to be included whenever is it that our seller is contingent on finding another property and closing at the same time.
Well, yeah, you're gonna need both, but they're not gonna be both in the same transaction. In your sale, you're gonna have the seller's purchase of replacement property on the property you're selling. On the property you're purchasing, you're gonna include the COP, the sale of buyer's property. So they're not gonna be in the same transaction. Like you don't need to give the buyer of your property a copy of the COP. It's only on the property you're purchasing.
Okay, perfect. Now I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So quickly, let's talk about the SIP here, the seller's license to remain in possession. So if I'm a contingent seller, I'm going to need time after close of escrow. Right? Because I have to, after this one closes, I have to close on the uplet, which means that I'm going to have some time to allow for that one to close. So I have to incorporate the seller license to remain in possession, which is for the seller to be in possession of the property they sold for a maximum of 29 days after close of escrow. Anything more than 29 days, and you're going to need an RLAS, which is a residential lease after sale. In most contingent sales, you're not going to need it if it's truly contingent. If you take the contingency off and try to do rent backs and things, then we'll add that. But let's look at a traditional contingent sale. So this is going to be, again, part of the purchase agreement, unless it's the seller incorporating it as part of a counter because the buyer didn't incorporate it. Okay. And I will tell you guys, as a buyer's agent, if you're writing an offer that you know is contingent on them finding a replacement property, then you need to include this with your offer because, again, it will help you with the strength of your offer. And I'll tell you why in a moment. Okay. So if I write the offer, I leave it as the default if I put it with the offer. If I'm a seller counter offer, I'm going to check off this box to incorporate it and then dates to match that counter offer and so forth. This addendum is intended to grant seller a license to remain in possession of and use the property after close of escrow. It is intended for short-term occupancy, 29 days or less. If occupancy is intended for 30 days or more, use residential lease after sale. No, local rent control or other laws regarding tenants' rights may impact buyers and sellers' rights and obligations. Close of escrow shall be day 0 for purposes of counting days for the term of this license to remain in possession. You're probably safe with rent control because most of these contingent sales are going to be single families and rent control laws don't apply to single families. Okay, so here's the term. How many days am I going to stay? Seller is granted the license to remain in possession of the property for blank calendar days after close of escrow. I would say at a minimum, you need 7 if you're contingent. I would probably play it safe and do 10, right? Because if we close on a Friday on a down leg, I need to transfer the funds over, which means I can't record. At the earliest I could probably record would be Tuesday, Wednesday. So right now I'm already at Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm 5 days already. Then I've got to fund it, record it, all that stuff. So just to be safe, I would request 10 days. If I do this at the very beginning of the offer, I can do all of this for zero cost, that I'm not going to pay anything for those 10 days. And in the market that we're in, most buyers will accept it at that point. If we try to negotiate a stay of occupancy after we've got it accepted, you're going to have a harder time with the buyer to accept it because they've already agreed to terms, right? So you got to do these things at the very beginning. Now, if I'm a buyer's agent writing it, I'm going to write the offer and tell them you guys got 10 days for free after close of escrow. That's going to help my offer because I know you're contingent. So please do that. Okay. So 10 days in the consideration here, we're going to put zeros and all of that. Now the CAR forms won't let you type a 0. So you have to handwrite zeros afterwards. So these two are going to be 0, 0, 0 here. The maintenance, this just says that the seller is going to take care of the maintenance. Now, here's the thing, the delivery of possession and possession fee, right? So the seller's agrees to give the property to him in the condition that were provided for in the agreement, which means any repairs that need to be done, anything else, like the condition of the property has to be delivered the way we agreed to. The delivery of possession fee is a amount of money that we put into escrow that gets held there and gets released to the seller when they move out on time. So I would suggest that even if you're giving them the time for free, I would ask for some amount in this delivery of possession fee. And if I were the seller, I would do the same thing, right? To have the buyers feel a little bit more comfortable that, hey, listen, I know that everybody's fear is that we're not going to move out. So we're going to leave X amount of money behind that will be released to us once we decide to move out. Okay. But there's one thing you got to do. You got to check this box that says held in escrow. Okay. If I don't check that box that says held in escrow, then what's going to happen is whatever amount we put in this delivery of possession fee is going to be given to the buyer. That's the default. So when we close escrow, if we said, okay, we're going to leave $3,000 behind as a delivery of possession fee, that's just showing you good faith that we're going to move out. If I don't check the box that says held in escrow, then when the day escrow closes, escrow releases that $3,000 to the buyers. And then the buyer is supposed to give it back to the seller when they move out. Now, can you see how there's some inherent trouble in that? So you've got to make sure that you're checking the box for held in escrow, because then escrow holds it. And when the seller moves out, escrow releases it to the seller, and we don't have to worry about them releasing it. Okay. The utilities, the seller's going to pay for all the utilities. Now, here's the other thing. Because the seller is technically a tenant, they have to give access to the property for the new owner, the buyer, if the buyer gives them a 24-hour notice, just like any tenant. So if my buyer's in there for 10 days or my seller's in there for 10 days and the buyer needs access for some reason, they have the right now, once escrow closes and they're the owner, they have the right to give a 24-hour notice to the seller and come into the property. The seller can't deny it. Okay. Now, if the seller does, what's going to happen? Right? They're not going to evict them. They don't have time. It's 10 days. Default on this with the keys and remotes and things like that is that they're supposed to deliver the keys, the remotes, and everything at the close of escrow, right? Because for those of you guys that are landlords, do you have copies of keys to all your units, right? It's the same thing here, is that you're now a tenant of the owner of the property. They're supposed to have a copy of keys. That's the default. But if we check the box here, in paragraph 6, then they don't get the keys until the 10 days is up, until the seller moves out. Okay. You can't assign it or sublet it, which means if I have access for 10 days, I can't go, hey, my cousin's going to move in and stay here for the 10 days while I move out. No, you can't do that. Right. And it's only the seller that has access to the property. The seller's personal property is not insured by the buyer, and if applicable, not by the buyer, not by the owner's association against loss or damage due to fire, theft, vandalism, rainwater, blah, blah, blah. That means the seller, who's now the tenant, the homeowner's insurance, the buyer is not responsible for any loss or damage. You got to make sure that you're insured for that. The waiver of any breach shall not be construed as a continuing waiver of the same and subsequent breach. What that means is, let's say that the seller doesn't give you access for the 24 days, right? And or the 24 hours, and they're in breach, and the buyer does nothing about it. It doesn't mean that if they ask for access again and the seller doesn't do it, that they have the right, because we gave them a pass the first time. If we could give you a pass 3 times on some breach, and on the 4th we decide to enforce it, we have the right to do that. Does that make sense? All it's saying is that because I don't do anything to punish you for breaching the agreement the first time, doesn't mean I won't the second time. That's all it says. Okay. Any other terms and conditions? What I might want to include in here, if I was the listing agent and I'm incorporating this, I would put that the seller would agree to pay a per diem of X for any day they remain past day 10, just in case. Because if I do that and the buyer accepts it, then they've accepted that I pay that amount of money and I'm able to stay in possession for those additional days. Okay. And what you want to understand from the seller's perspective is it's more protective, because then I can't be sued for damages if I'm there late. And for the buyer, it means that, hey, at least you know you're getting X amount of money if the seller doesn't move out on time. Okay. Everybody signs it and you submit it. So you have to use the seller in possession no matter what. If the seller's staying 3 days, 1 day, 29 days, you have to use the seller in possession addendum. Okay. To be incorporated in the offer. It's required. The offer states that it's required now. Okay. So those are the forms that we're going to need for a contingent sale. Does anybody have any questions? You can ask questions about anything. It doesn't have to be just about that form. I mean, that's what we talked about, but any questions right now before I let you guys go? Because we went a little past 12. Anybody? All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate you being here. Hopefully that helps you feel a little less scared about contingent sales, but I'm always here to give you guidance and help you out with that. So thank you so much. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.